So we're here today with Gavin, who's just written a book, and he was researching for that book for about 3 years and has been working with the soil for about 15 years and has been in love with the earth all of his life. So welcome, Gavin. You're writing a book. What's it called?
The book's called Recipes for Reciprocity, the regenerative way from seed to table.
Why'd you call it that?
Well, I've been in love with cooking for a big portion of my life, like you just said, and I love creating recipes. But I didn't want to create a book that's just about getting a bunch of ingredients from the store and putting them in our bodies. I wanted to include the earth that gave those ingredients to us in the first place. And that's what reciprocity is about. It's about returning the gift and completing the cycle. And so I wanted to write a book that is not only about creating, but it's also about honoring the source of the gifts that allowed us to create in the first place, the earth. So giving back to the earth and doing that in various means, rather could be literally from the meals that we create. We use the scraps and we compost and create soil. Or it could be things that are a little bit more spiritual or conceptual, like just saying gratitude, like people say grace, or just saying thank you to the plants or whatever nourishes us.
So you said you were in love with cooking, and that's been a large part of your life, but you've told me that you're also in love with gardening. What is it about gardening that you love?
Well, I've always felt drawn to plants since I was young. Since I was young, I'd be cruising around out in the garden, touching plants and exploring things and going out in the wilderness. So when my parents bought an orchard in the late 90s, I was really in my element to be able to see things grow, and I started experimenting with growing vegetables and stuff there. And I tasted the difference between mass-produced food that you get in the typical grocery store and food that's grown in rich soil with care. And when I had that distinction, what a real tomato or a real apple tastes like, I knew I wanted it to be a part of my life from then on.
So what was the best surprise that you've ever had in gardening?
Well, that would be that gardening doesn't have to be relentlessly working hard and going against the forces of nature like conventional thinking teaches us, to chop and hack our way into the soil and plant these straight rows and monocultures and fight off all the bad guys and all this kind of thinking that we get taught conventionally. If you start to align with all the layers of a functioning ecosystem in the garden, then you start to see these amazing cycles weave themselves into your production systems. And you'll have kale that you planted, and then the next year it comes back and has beautiful flowers that are edible and are attracting pollinators for boosting all the other crops. And then eventually they set seeds, and then they seed themselves. And so you get 100 times as much kale as you had the first year without doing any work, and the added benefit of pollination. And that happens with a wide group of crops. So you can create self-sowing garden beds that just produce amazing abundance.
Will you be talking about that at all in your book?
I certainly will.
So that's the surprise, but what has gardening taught you? Like, what kind of difficulty did you come across that gave you a new insight to gardening?
The difficulty I came across.
Yeah, like did you have, for example, some kind of dis-ease that came across your crops, or
Sure.
some kind of pest, or...
Yeah, well, using conventional growing things, I tried growing tomatoes, for instance. And here in the Great Lakes region, we have a pretty high humidity. So on top of the normal issues that can face tomato growers when they're grown in close quarters, or even just some varieties are prone to them regardless, we have higher humidity. So things like powdery mildew and blight can be pretty easily something to wipe out your whole tomato crop. So when I started planting them in rows, typically how you grow them, and saw some of the end of the season problems like that, I was really amazed at how aligning with cycles and diversity in the ecosystem of the garden can mitigate those problems.
Can you just tell me briefly what that means, aligning with the ecosystem?
So when a plant grows from seed in a healthy ecosystem, it's not just the plant. The plant, the second it germinates and even before, is coexisting with myriad other organisms in the soil, from bacteria to fungi and all the different soil life, from microscopic and insects, macroscopic insects in there. And it develops these relationships from the second it sprouts out of its roots. Some of them are mycorrhizal fungi that are interacting with the root, and they exist much deeper down in the soil. They have these strands, these hyphae, and they reach down deeper than the roots ever could. They pull up minerals and they pull up nutrients. They offer them to the plant, and the plant is photosynthesizing, and so it pulls down some extra sugars and gives it to the fungi. And so they have this interchanging symbiotic relationship. And because of that, the plant will be much more resilient against pathogenic fungi, which are trying to attack it, like a powdery mildew or a blight, for instance. And the same for other symbiotic relationships that exist. So if you have a functioning ecosystem in the soil, your plants are much better off to fight off any issues they might face.
That's pretty interesting. And if you're going to have that in your book, are you going to give suggestions of what they can do to have that kind of symbiotic relationship in their gardens?
Certainly. So I'm going to think about, how does a forest build its soil? What does it take for a plant community to really thrive in a forest? And how can we incorporate that in our garden space? How can we emulate it in areas and still get the things that we want out of our garden, but also involve all that diverse ecosystem that makes those things really thrive without much work in the forest?
So who's your book really aimed at?
Well, my book is really aimed at everyone. I hope that there's someone out there who will read these concepts and create a synthesis of them and talk to a little toddler about them, because the kids getting out there and getting their hands in the soil and really seeing the joy of caring for things and watching them grow and making that a part of their life can be a huge positive influence on this world. We start getting more kids into that instead of zombifying on the smartphones and whatnot. And also, I think that there's people who've been gardening for many years, or who haven't just not taken it up yet, who are in later years of their life, who could benefit greatly from the perspectives that are really their ancient perspectives. A lot of permaculture is borrowed traditions from indigenous peoples all over, who are really well suited at balancing their horticultural practices with nature, and then also augmenting it with new scientific understanding to push it that extra distance.
Okay, so now what if I'm not a gardener, because I'm saying I can't grow anything? Every time I try to grow something, something goes wrong and I just can't do it. What would you say to a person like that? Why should they get your book?
Well, I would say you can create a system where things that already thrive by themselves, that can also nourish your body. Some of them you might consider weeds currently, but some of them can be also things you buy at the supermarket. You can plant those, and if you set up the soil right and you set up the conditions for things decomposing, like with a good mulching practice, they're basically a totally hands-off cultivation system in which you set it up initially, and then once the thing grows, it's there, it's growing by itself on the natural rain cycles. Maybe if you were in a really hotter region, an arid region, you want to set up a drip feed, but it's so simple that you would just turn on the water for an hour and then turn it back off, and then the plant couldn't get too much or not enough water, and you're fine.
So is that an expensive kind of setup, because you're talking about, preparing the soil? Do I have to start renting tillers and things? Like, what's this going to cost? Is it an expensive hobby?
No, the whole point of what I'm trying to do is for people to be able to save money on food and all kinds of other things that come from depending on conventional agriculture. So I'm going to be looking at ways that we can use resources that are already at our disposal, that are produced by trees and other parts of the ecosystem around us, that we can incorporate into building soil. And when you do have to go out and buy a few things, it's usually a one-time purchase that'll last many years. So that initial thing of a little drip feeder that you're going to put under your mulch and hook up to your hose, if you need that, or your rain sequestration system on the side of your house, It'll last you many years and save you having to worry about if I watered it too much or that kind of thing.
Now, what about if I don't have any land to make a garden? Can I still buy your book? Will it still be of any use to me?
Yep, I'm going to be including information in the garden for people who don't actually have land or soil to grow in, because you can grow even if you just have a balcony, and you can grow in partial light and full sun. Even if you were stuck in a cement box with no windows in an apartment building, there's still things you could grow. Everyone has a window, so you can grow some things in the window, and then there's other things you can cultivate that aren't necessarily in the plant kingdom, but you can cultivate fungi. Fungi don't necessarily require sunlight, and yet if you get the basic materials, you can grow them in your house, and you can have super nutritious food available in any space.
So when you sat down to decide, I'm writing a book about this, what was your motivation?
Well, after gardening for a few years myself, I saw the amazing abundance that it can produce even in a small space. And I imagined, how can I unlock that potential? How can it be shared with other people? And after I started saving seeds, I saw the latent potential in a single seed or a handful of seeds is immense if you share them out with several other people and they do the same thing. So I thought, how can I connect my passion for cooking onto all the things that I've learned about cultivating food? And so this book felt like a natural evolution of connecting the two things and just being able to offer people a path to kind of reconnect with the earth in an era where technological distractions and other addictions have really sucked up a lot of our energy and the pursuit of material wealth. And I found it was so much more enriching to really have these moments in the garden where you're connecting with the living things that nourish you than to buy a bunch of shiny stuff. So I wanted to share that.
So what has been your greatest inspiration in growing?
My greatest inspiration in growing? Probably my parents. My parents left their super high-paced lifestyle at the high-end ski resort of Whistler to buy a farm without any experience whatsoever. And they dived in headfirst to learn about how to cultivate apples and a wide range of other soft fruit, got into doing ground crops and all kinds of stuff, and they really embraced it. And they had people who were in Whistler who were so grateful that someone was taking the time to grow this really high quality food and bring it to them rather than what they get at the grocery store. And so from that I saw that growing food to nourish yourself and others is a really noble endeavor and something worth pursuing.
Now, what would you like people to know? If you could just sum it up in a few words, what would you like people to know about your book?
The book is meant to serve as an invitation to reconnect with the living planet that sustains us, and to do so in a way that also nourishes ourselves and our loved ones. And it's going to be accessible to people who are new to gardening and even new to cooking. And it's also going to be offering different horizons of learning that are offshoots from the typical gardener experience that one can really hone in on to increase the yield of their garden and at the same time give back to the planet and the ecosystem. So it's going to be a way to expand our understanding, enrich our joy in the simple moments in life, and nourish our bodies at the same time.
So you keep mentioning cooking off and on. Are you saying there's something about cooking in the actual book?
There is. There will be recipes in the recipe book. The recipes, they're a collection from different cultures. Some of the cultures that they had a really great balance in the way that they cultivated food, traditionally at least. And so I felt inspired to look at what did they do with their crops when they were doing these great sustainable agricultural systems. How did they create with them? And creating those recipes myself is a way to really engage with those people, even if they don't exist anymore, because you're enjoying the same meal that they would have enjoyed and sowing the same crops. That's like the living legacy of what they tended to.
So you're on Kickstarter to help kick this book off. And I've noticed by doing my research that in less than a week, you have gone from 0 to more than 2/3 of your acquired goal or required goal. And that while you're also doing that, you're accompanying some of the books with seeds. How does that work?
Yeah, the Kickstarter has been going amazing. So we've got over 70% of the funding in the first, I think it's 6 days now of the campaign. So we're well on the way to being able to get to the funding to be able to supply everyone who's backed with the book, and the seeds that are going to come along with it are a collection of seeds that I've grown over the years that I really love working with, and they serve like a really wide spectrum nutritionally to care for the body, and they can also work together well in companion plantings. So I'm excited about being able to provide the actual seeds for the ingredients for the recipes that people are going to be cooking.
Okay, and so where are you sourcing these seeds from? Besides your own?
Well, I've gotten some of the seeds from an awesome heirloom seed company called Baker Creek Rare Seeds. And then I've also got some seeds to finish off the Three Sisters. And then I'm going to include seeds from my own garden with a select number of the books. So I've saved those for up to 7-8 generations now, the best crops out of our garden, and those will be going out with 10 of the select books.
So I have one more question. You're busy with your garden in your own suburban backyard. What do you do when you don't have enough space? Do you reach out to the community? Do you just cut back on your crops? Like, what do you do?
Well, first I think about, am I layering the space that I have effectively like an ecosystem would, or am I just planting one layer of crops where I could be incrementally putting them all hanging out like a family and giving and taking from each other? Then after that's maxed out, then I engage with the community and see if there's a place that could be a space where lots of different people could cultivate a garden, and I could give my knowledge by helping to build soil, and I can cultivate crops and people can harvest from them, and we can all benefit from the space. So I worked on creating a community garden with that intent. And then also engaging with schools that have school gardens already set up to offer them the abundance so they can use the seeds and any information that might be helpful to them to cultivate the soil there so kids can learn about it.
Don't you have something like that set up in your Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah, so I put the options so that you could have a book purchased for yourself and one donated to a school of your choice, so that the people who have school gardens and maybe even a kitchen can do cultivation based on regenerative gardening practices for building the soil and learning about all the cycles that are going on in nature and in the garden to really expand the kids' knowledge on a wide range of subjects, and then also creating in the kitchen if they have a kitchen.
That's wonderful. So I guess I want to close with this one question. For future generations, what would you like them to remember about this time on the planet, and how would you like them to see that we've progressed from where we were 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, when they look back in the future, from the future?
Well, I'm sure they'll be shaking their heads and looking at how we've put ourselves on a trajectory where we clearly knew that there was stuff we couldn't keep doing and we're going to run out of and we're totally dependent on, but we just needlessly continued out of addiction or complacency or who knows what. So I'm sure they'll be shaking their heads, but I hope they saw that some people saw this pattern, this totally unsustainable and insane pattern of behaviors, and decided to chart a new course, one that looks to examples that have already existed in human history where we've had pockets of people that had a balance with the planet and even had a reciprocal relationship where they give and take with the ecosystems of Mother Earth, and people that also tried to find new ways to express that kind of relationship and to just to live with reverence and gratitude for what we have, and also try to pass that, all the abundance, on to future generations.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us today, Gavin. And for the people who are listening and watching, the Kickstarter link will be added to this video, and we will hopefully see you on Kickstarter. Thanks for your time.